Welcome to the Phoenix Conversations. Second chances, fresh starts, and powerful new chapters. I'm Lucy Macara, author and entrepreneur, and each week I talk to men and women who have lived through turning points and come out brighter on the other side. Whether this is the first time you've listened to this podcast or you're a regular listener, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit subscribe. Today, I'm talking to Susan Payton, who is the author of a book and founder of a business, both called The Business of Stories. Susan helps entrepreneurs use storytelling to attract dream clients and make more sales through a powerful process for creating engaging, story-led content that converts. As you'll hear, Susan's reinvention started when she was a teenager, and she went through a number of life changes until she started a coaching business and struggled to be heard above the noise. She realized something had to change and took the risk of ditching the standard marketing tactics and advice and instead put everything she'd studied about storytelling into practice. Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for joining me on the Phoenix Conversations. It's lovely to have you here.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Susan, you know this is all about reinvention, but I always like to start at the very beginning. So just give me a snapshot of what kind of child you were or childhood you had that sort of set the scene for the rest of your life.
I was quite a quiet child. I was very sensitive. I know now that I'm probably an empath. I'm probably a very highly sensitive person. I pick up on people's energy and what they're feeling, which makes me great at what I do. It's really helpful when I'm helping people to explore their stories and things. But as a young child, I didn't really know what to do with it or how to process it. So I was quite a big overthinker. I was probably a bit serious. My mum kept telling me I was oversensitive, but I didn't know how to turn it up or down.
So did that change at any time? Was there a kind of period as you grew up where you felt I need to reinvent myself and be somebody different in the world?
Yeah, well, when I was 12 or 13, my mum and dad decided to get a pub. And so I became a publican's daughter. And that was a massive change. Gone from a very kind of, quiet family to mum and dad, 2 kids, not much social life really that I remember. We had kind of one friend, one other couple that we used to go and hang out with a little bit, but not much. And suddenly I was thrust into being in a pub, living in a pub. And from a very young age, I was helping in the pub. I was stocking the shelves. I was helping out. And yeah, I started to actually serve behind the bar, probably 14. I don't know what the rules are now. Probably couldn't do that. But back then, I was behind the bar. So suddenly my world really opened up and I was having conversations. I was hanging out with adults. I was serving alcohol. Very, very different world. And in fact, once we got into the pub, I don't ever really remember us having family time again. Even all sitting down to dinner at the same time kind of went because there was always something to do. Either my mum or my dad would be downstairs. There was, cooking to do for the pub. We used to serve food. So suddenly family life as I knew it really went out the window. You don't have much privacy when you live in a pub. You feel like it's a bit like EastEnders, like you're literally watching somebody's life, And in fact, the pub we had in Battersea in South London, you couldn't get from upstairs downstairs into the kitchen without everybody in the bar seeing you. So if you wanted to run downstairs to get a cup of tea or a snack, you had to brush your hair, check what you were wearing. You couldn't wander around in your pajamas, So it was very different, very, very different life. And I think probably 2 or 3 things happened. I think one, I came out of my shell because the world wasn't just focused on me anymore and what was going on in my head. Like there was so much more going on. Also, I think that I started to become fascinated by people. Like I started people watching quite a lot. And I wonder, even when I look back, if it's where my fascination with people's stories and things, because, just standing there behind the bar, listening, catching all the bits of conversations, hearing what people were talking about was fascinating. And the third thing was that my mental maths was amazing. Because I was adding all these rounds up every night in my head. We didn't have all these flash, tills and computers. We literally pen and paper and a cash box. So my mental math was amazing.
Well, that sounds very much like, a first reinvention to me, quite a substantial family reinvention, but also a personal reinvention for you at quite a young age. So what came after that then, Susan? Did you go to college or university?
Yeah, I went to college. I really didn't know what to do when I came out of school. I had absolutely no idea. So I thought, what skill could I acquire that would just set me off, set me on some kind of path? Because I really, really didn't know what I wanted to do. I loved sociology at school, and I thought maybe I wanted to be a social worker. But then I watched Kramer versus Kramer and cried for about a week. And my mum said to me, maybe that's not the career for you. So I actually went to secretarial college. I went to Kingston College of Further Education. I did a 2-year private secretary's diploma with A-level English and business studies. And trained to be what they call then a private secretary. Actually, I think it was a really good decision because it got me out into the workplace and it got me into some fascinating roles. Like I got into television and radio. I worked at TVAM, if you remember TVAM, up at Camden Lock. And I worked there for a few years in several different departments. I worked in personnel. I worked in the press office. So that was a lot of fun. I moved into Capital Radio. I worked with Chris Tarrant. I was Chris Tarrant's right-hand woman for years and years and years. Worked with lots of other celebrities too. Gabby Logan, her husband, Kenny Logan, who's a rugby player. I ran his testimonial year. So it was a really, really interesting career. So I was really glad that I made that decision to do that. It's not something when I was training, it's not something I thought, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. But because the roles I got were so varied and interesting, I stayed kind of doing that kind of work for a lot longer than I originally thought that I would. But along the way, various things happened that kind of fall under that reinvention thing. In 1991, I went traveling around the world on my own. And that was amazing. Like that really helped me to understand who I was and, what I wanted and how I wanted to show up in the world and all of those things. So I spent a year traveling on my own, which was an amazing experience. And then I came back and in 93, I had my daughter, my first daughter. I had her quite young. First couple of years were quite difficult with, I was in quite a stressful relationship. But then I became a single mum. So again, I went from traveling, carefree, world is my oyster, to being a mum and having, in my early 20s, having my daughter, which was amazing. And we always had a fabulous relationship. We was always very close. She was born on my birthday, believe it or not. So we share the same birthday. So we've always had a great relationship. We're very close. We had a real bond. But again, that was a huge change, and something that meant my life was very different, had very different priorities. But I managed to stay in work, doing the kind of work I was doing, because I could do a lot of it from home, even though VAs and virtual assistants weren't a thing back then. We didn't even have the internet, actually, or I didn't have the internet back then. But when I worked with Chris Tarrant, he actually didn't live that far from me. I used to drive to his house, pick up the mail. It just sounds so funny now. Have a couple of hours with him, bring it back home, answer it all. And I just made that work for, a few years while my daughter was growing up.
So that sounds like, an interesting and ultimately kind of well-organized part of your life that you made work for you after you'd reinvented yourself as a mum, basically, and a freelancer. So what changed after that then? Because obviously that's not what you're still doing now. So what was your next reinvention?
The next reinvention was probably around 2000, end of 2008, beginning of 2009. I had been building up a portfolio of property. So I had 5 properties at that point, and what I'd been doing was buying properties, renting them out, letting a bit of equity build up, take the equity out, buy the next property. And so I was doing that alongside, my freelance work. And so life was great in 2008. Like, I had these properties, I had a great job, I was hanging around with celebrities, I worked in the media. Even though I was a single mum, we had a beautiful house, we had lots of lovely holidays, had a nice car, it was all going really, really well. And then the property market crashed. And it crashed at a time when I had taken all of the equity out of all of my properties. I'd put it into a property in Streatham in South London, and the plan was to develop the property with a developer into a couple of apartments and sell them on. And then overnight, literally, the property market crashed. The developer disappeared off the face of the planet. And overnight, I found myself £250,000 in debt. So that was a big turning point, as you can imagine. It was very scary. It was very stressful, but I got through it, as you do with these things. But I definitely reassessed a lot. It was a very difficult time. It took me probably 12 months to really sort myself out, get back on track, work through the process that I had to go through. I had all of these properties in negative equity. I couldn't pay the mortgages. Like, it was a really, really hard time, which I know from sharing that story in the past. I know there's lots of other people who went through something very similar at that time. And then I met my husband, who could not have had a more different life than me. He was the complete opposite. He's a farmer. He lived on a farm down in West Sussex, down on the south coast of England. And I was this crazy London girl with this media life and all these properties and, everything going on. And he was very calm and grounded. But we met through a friend, and honestly, sometimes I think he saved my life because I was in such a stressful place with everything going on, with everything I was trying to manage, trying to hold it all together, trying to pay the bills, trying to not lose everything. I mean, I did lose everything in the end. But yeah, he met me at a very, very difficult time in my life. So the fact that he hung around is pretty pretty impressive, I think, with everything I had going on. He could have run a mile, but he didn't. And actually in 2000 and my brain's gone mush. 2009. Yes, I moved down here. Left London behind, left my London life behind, and moved down here and married him and became a farmer's wife. So that was huge change again. I went from having a really hectic, busy social life, lots and lots going on, lots of hands in lots of different pies, sorting out the properties and business and all my clients. I had a few clients at that point. And I came down to live on the farm. And it was such the right thing for me to do at the time, because I could not have carried on like that. I actually had ME at this point. I was so exhausted from it all that I was being treated for ME. I was exhausted all the time. I was, I could sleep for 10 hours and still wake up exhausted. So everything was a bit of a struggle. And so coming down here was amazing. And really, I was able to just get myself back together, get myself back on track, carry on sorting out the aftermath of, losing all of these properties and everything that had to be done. I carried on with a couple of clients. I carried on working for Chris because at this point we had internet and we had emails, and I didn't need to be in the same place as him. I could still carry on organizing his life from down here. And then in the beginning of 2014, we went off to New Zealand for a month. We just took a month out, went off to New Zealand. And while I was in New Zealand, I decided that I wanted to do something different. Like, I'd been doing the same kind of work for a long, long time. I'd been running people's lives, organizing everybody for a long time. And I always loved it. I never fell out of love with it. I think I just got to the point where I thought, I wonder if I'm capable of more. Like, I wonder if, I don't want to get to the end of my life and think, oh, that's all I ever did, was organize other people's life. I wonder if I could do something more meaningful, and something that I could grow and kind of take ownership of, and, a proper business. So I decided while I was away in New Zealand that I was going to explore what that could look like when I got back. So when we got back from New Zealand, I started to put the feelers out and see what was out there. I remember picking up a book. It was called Copy This Idea, and it was by a guy called Andrew Reynolds. And I remember reading it on the plane, and it was about online businesses, basically, which I really didn't know much about. I thought a business was, bricks and mortar and people and, physical places, and I never really thought about what an online business could look like. The book just sparked a few ideas, and I came back and I just went looking online for, what could I do? I know what my strengths are, and I know what I can do, and I know what I enjoy doing, but I don't know how I would turn that into a business. So I started to look around. There was the FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses. They had a few resources and things, but I couldn't really find what I was looking for. So I thought, well, if I'm out there looking for help and support to start a business, there'll be other women that are too. So I ended up starting a business called the Business of Mums. And it was for mums who wanted to start their own business, or what started their own business and wanted to, a bit of community and support, and to, so I started the Business of Mums, and then that very quickly became almost a full-time job. I was doing interviews with these moms. I was doing, finding all of these resources, bringing in experts, all sorts of things. But I wasn't charging anything. I wasn't making any income from it. It wasn't a business. It was just me kind of getting out there and surrounding myself with all these women in business, and just looking for where's the value that I bring? Like, how can I help them? What's the difference that I can make here? And then I realized that it was helping these women to tell their stories. Like, there were so many of them that had the most fascinating stories, and they had these great businesses that they'd built. Some of them were online. A lot of them weren't online at that point. And I would say, like, oh, tell me the story. Tell me how you came to be doing this. And they would tell me the most fascinating story. And then I would go and look at their website or their social media, and I would say, well, there's none of that on, that story's not out there, and people don't know that about you. And then people started to say, well, maybe you could help me share my story. And the Business of Mums actually became the Business of Stories.
That's a wonderful reinvention. That's very kind of clear, and a great story in itself. So how did you turn the Business of Stories into an actual paying business?
So I had the aha moment one night at an event when somebody was saying that they'd been invited to speak at an event and they didn't know what to talk about. And I said, talk about your story, tell your story, share your story. I talked about when I shared my story in my group, the Business of Mums, and how people had really resonated with it and reached out to me because of it. And so I was talking to this person about sharing their story, and somebody turned around and said to me, why don't you run a workshop for all of us? Why don't you put something together for us? And actually, the guy that suggested it said, we could even offer it outside. People could come in. And that's when I had the aha moment. I was like, oh, maybe storytelling could be my thing. Maybe helping people tell their story could be it. And so within days, the business of stories had been born. When you hit on the right thing, everything just falls into place, and it just fell into place very, very quickly. And in fact, at the time, I had just started doing what was then called Threshold Accelerator, which was run by Daniel Priestley's father, Andrew Priestley. And I actually had a call with Andrew, and I told him about this aha moment that I'd had, and it's going to be all about storytelling, and I'm going to call it the business of stories. And he said, well, we're all getting together on Saturday. He said, why don't you come to the front of the room and pitch your idea? So I went to the front of the room of these 50 entrepreneurs, and I did 10 minutes. I was awful. I was so nervous. I couldn't hold the microphone. My whole life I'd been very much behind the scenes. And in fact, this is another reinvention, right? I went from PA, the person behind the scenes, supporting, holding everything together, making sure everything ran in the background, to suddenly being at the front of the room, holding a microphone, which absolutely terrified the life out of me. But I did stumble through it. I told them all about this, what had happened when I'd shared my stories, how I was so passionate about helping other people, particularly those business owners who didn't like all the bro marketing and the kind of really salesy, making people run to the back of the room with their credit card, the people that didn't like all of that. I wanted to show people how to connect through stories. And I left that room that day with 5 paying clients. Like 5 people came up to me and said, I need this. Can you help me with my story? So I literally put a package together in 24 hours, sent it over to them. And by the following Monday, I had my 5 clients, and the business of stories was up and running. And then I really worked one-to-one for a few years until I wrote my book in 2022. And I feel a little bit like the book, even though I'd been working 6 years with clients one-to-one on their stories up to that point. So the business of stories was well established. I knew what I was doing. But I feel like it's when the book came out in 2022 that my business was really born, that my process came to life. I had that ownership, that IP. I had the book out in the world. And I was able to transition from working one-to-one with clients to, reaching hundreds, thousands of people. My book did really well, and I started to create courses and programs. So I actually used the metaphor the other day that the book felt a bit like the baby, right? I was really birthing this new thing, this process, this way of showing, lots and lots of people rather than working one-to-one. So that actually felt quite new. And then over the next couple of years, I, took people through my courses and programs, and they evolved, and I became more confident in what I was doing and what I was teaching and how I could coach people through it. So then when I launched the podcast, I feel like that was the young adult, right? That was where I was kind of getting a much better sense of who I am, what I'm about, what I believe, what I stand for, how I want to show up. The podcast was me kind of stepping into that role of leader and sharing what I'd learned and, sharing the lessons and the insights and things. And then I am just about to launch something called the Story-Led Sales System. And this feels like the grown up. Like, this feels like everything I've done in my business, everything I've learned from years and years of working with business owners and on their stories, writing the book, creating my process, coming up with the courses and programs, and now creating this system that people go through to make sure their stories are doing the selling for them. And yeah, this feels like I now have a proper grown-up business.
I love that metaphor of actually 3 reinventions in one as you kind of grow up business-wise. The baby book, although I would always say that becoming an author for the first time is a reinvention in itself. It's the reinvention of how you feel about yourself, and it's a reinvention of how the world sees you, because even if it's a first step, it is really showcasing you and birthing you, if you like, as the expert in your field, as the authority. So I think that's very very much a reinvention step, but I hadn't thought of the podcast, and I'll take this to heart myself, as being the next step
Yeah.
and a different phase. That's great too. And so, okay, so the third phase, the grown-up phase, tell us some more about that.
Yeah, I think it's just, when the book came out, it was very much how to, get your stories out of your head, how to dive into who your customer is and what their story is, and then find those connections, find the sweet spot in the middle. So you're telling the right stories to the right people at the right time. But then as my courses and programs, as I built them, as I took people through them, as I started working with people, I realized that that's just step one. Being able to understand your stories and share your stories is the beginning. Then you need to work on your overall messaging. You need to really understand your customer story so well that when you talk about what you do, it really resonates with them. It's relevant, it's relatable, they feel like you're talking to them and the messaging really lands with them. Then you need to think about the offers that you're creating. So I actually have a storyteller's offer framework, and we start in the customer story, like what's going on for them? Where are they? How are they feeling? Where do they want to get to? What's getting in the way of them having that? How are they feeling about that? What's at stake? What's it costing them to stay here stuck and not be able to achieve what they want to achieve? So we start in the customer story, and then the offers, the right offers for the right people, come from there, rather than what a lot of people do, which is the opposite, which is, what can I do? What's my skills? What do I love doing? What do I love teaching? What offer could I put together that I think is of value to people? I actually start in the customer story, because that's where you're really going to find the offers that are going to really, connect and resonate and be compelling and irresistible to the right people. And then we look at content. So, when you've got your stories, you've got your messaging, you've got your offers. Now you need to make sure you're creating the content that people want, that people are going to connect with, that it's going to speak to people. So again, I've got a whole framework on making sure your content is consistent, because what you want your content to do is get you known for what you do, right? So it needs to be consistent around your core message, around your sweet spot, so that you're not just putting stuff out there ad hoc and it's all feeling a bit disjointed and a bit, which I see a lot of people do. And then the final piece is sales, because you're a business and you need clients. So really the story-led sales system was me just taking all the things I was doing with clients, but actually putting into a framework again. Everything always comes back to having that structure, that framework, that process that people can follow, but with much more focus on the selling, because this is business. This is not just storytelling for the sake of it. This is not just a nice to have. It's not the fluffy stuff, it's not fairy tales. It's strategically telling the right stories in the right way so that it brings you clients, it brings you sales, and you grow your business.
That sounds very exciting, and it sounds potentially like another book to me, Susan.
Yes, I did think that. I think that is probably the next book.
Well, that would be another great reinvention. So, Susan, finally, if somebody else out there listening today is going through some crisis period, like when you lost the value of all your property or had to make a decision to go and become a farmer's wife instead of a London girl, what one piece of advice would you give them if change is looming, whether they're choosing it or it's being thrust upon them?
Yeah.
What one piece of advice would really help?
I think one of the things I would say, because I was talking to my eldest daughter about this quite recently, because she's made some big changes in her life. And the one thing I would say is, it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. It doesn't matter decisions you've made before, whether they were good decisions or whether things worked out the way you did or the way that you didn't want to. It doesn't matter. Like, you're writing your story every day, right? You're choosing how your story plays out, how your story unfolds. I know sometimes that obviously there's things out of our control. I didn't choose to lose everything in the property market crash, but it was up to me how that story went from there. It was up to me how I dealt with it, And I think that what can get in the way sometimes is we think, well, we can't leave that job or change careers or even leave that relationship because we've invested so much into it. We've put so much into it. We've been doing it for all of this length of time. But you really can just start afresh from today. Make decisions based on where you're at today, not what's happened in the past. Just assess everything now, today, look at where you're at, and then think about what you want your future to look like. What do you want the next chapter to be? Because you are the master of your own story, right? You are the author, and you can decide how you want it to play out, how you want to show up, and what the next chapter will be.
Susan, I really think that's a brilliant piece of advice. Tell your new story starting from now. I think that's fantastic. So, Susan Payton, thank you very much for sharing your reinvention stories. I've loved hearing them, and thank you, and all the best with the next phase of the business of stories.
Thank you so much.
Susan, thank you for sharing your story and your journey and your reinventions. Of course, as a master storyteller, you've given a great demonstration of how good storytelling engages your listeners and makes people want to be part of your world. If you're standing on the edge of change or just need proof that reinvention can come from anywhere at any time, listen to Susan's great advice and subscribe now to the Phoenix Conversations on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or maybe all three. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook, and Substack. Due to my unspellable and unpronounceable name, I am the only Lucy Macara on the internet, and I'd love to hear your reinvention story. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.